Hi, hello, and welcome, or welcome back, I suppose. I may still sound Grey Day Grim, just as a pointer. In fact, I think I might sound worse than last week's video. Anyway, somehow, I have, in my recent string of historical fiction reads, landed on 3 17th century settings, 2 of which with Amsterdam as a major location, and all 3 with a death sentence as a major plot point. If the miniaturist had opened with a pre-death sentence moment ruminating on what was about to happen, then we'd be 3 for 3, but at the very least they all use the technique of hooking us in with a moment from later on in the novel and then sending us back to how we got there. And no, I didn't do it on purpose. For my run up to the year's end, I pretty randomly picked on my shelf, landing towards whatever called to me. I only have 2 left now, and I know one of them isn't going to be in the same vein, but if my next read is, I am actually going to lose it a little bit. Anyway, that's enough preamble. Let's get onto some swashbuckling, lesbianism, and gender nonconformity with Ghost Ship by Kate Moss. Spoilers ahead, and I don't know if I have any Dutch or French words in this script, I can't remember, but I apologise in advance for any poor pronunciation. I am not an expert or fluent in either of those languages. Ghost Ship follows Louise Redon Joubert from a little before her 25th birthday in 1610 up to 1621, which is also where we have our prologue while Louise is awaiting the death penalty. She lives with her grandparents who have raised her. Both of her parents met an untimely end, which Louise unfortunately witnessed. They reside in Paris, awaiting the inheritance her father left her upon turning 25. It's a sum that will allow her to live an incredibly wealthy life, and though this inheritance doesn't serve her too much at first, it becomes very useful later on when she is changing her course. She also has always had this urge to head out to sea. Though she knows superstitious sailors don't allow women on ships, she's forever determined. She's especially after the opportunity to run the ship that's now in the care of her aunt, who runs a merchant fleet, and this vessel she has her sights on is called the Old Moon. Meanwhile, a 10-year-old little girl in La Rochelle is about to turn her life upside down at the behest of her mother. The little girl's twin brother has died, but her uncle is in need of an apprentice, and her mother knows that she herself will be taken care of if her plan goes into fruition. This little girl will no longer live life as herself, instead effectively becoming her brother. She's young enough at this point for nobody to really question it, and therefore she is from now on known as Gilles. 10 years later, Louise is holding a dinner party to honour the retirement of one of the most senior captains in her aunt's fleet. It is here where our 2 protagonists meet, though the circumstances aren't exactly ideal. Gilles is with his uncle, a wine merchant, and they have another guest with them who got in on the claim that he's a distant cousin of the retiring captain. Alas, he is actually the husband of Gilles' mother, who has been kicked out from her brother's care and is seeking revenge by way of taking his fortune. To do so, they need the key to his safe box, but things don't quite go to plan and the uncle ends up being stabbed to death. Louise takes Gilles into her care, and as the 2 of them steadily begin to open up to one another, it is more than just a friendship that forms. Now, a lot happens in this book, so we are going to cut to a good while later with a quick rundown of Gilles' mother is dead after a fight with Louise, though it isn't really Louise's fault. We discover that her father was, however, killed at her hand as a rash act of revenge after seeing her mother killed, and Gilles has revealed his true nature to Louise, though it does not change her feelings, and they decide, post the death of Gilles' mother, to head out on the Old Moon, which Louise now does own, and perhaps settle elsewhere. This book is like 500 pages. There's no way to condense this down quickly. I'm doing my best here. The captain that was hired on the Old Moon is an absolute lecherous creep, as well as a dictator at the helm. He ends up dead. Oh no. So they come up with a new plan. Louise takes helm as the captain, and given that everybody there is anti-pirate, and also carries a deep-seated hatred for the newly growing rise of the slave trade that's happening at that moment in time, they come up with a new plan. After rescuing the sole survivor on a ship with an otherwise entirely dead crew floating endlessly through the seas, their idea becomes clear. They can recreate that sea fog that took the ship out, albeit in an attack that will keep them as safe as they can be, and stop the pirate and slave boats on their way out before they can even cause any harm. The crew becomes almost legendary. The Old Moon becomes the ghost ship, but with legend comes notoriety, and things can't stay good forever. I usually try and keep these synopses shorter than that, but it is hard to condense this book. There's a lot going on all of the time, and there's a lot of strings being pulled. I missed a lot out there, but this is meant to be a review, not a retelling, so let's actually get into reviewing things. First and foremost, this is a wonderfully queer, especially lesbian novel. Most obviously, we have Louise and Gilles, though Gilles is referred to with his name and male pronouns. It does seem to be the case that he does still hold on to the fact that there is womanhood within him. He's lived so long as Gilles that he sort of just has to keep it up at this point for everyone's sake, because otherwise a lot of things could come undone. But when he's alone with Louise, he loosens his shirt and his chest binding, allowing her to see beyond the veneer. I do genuinely think a huge component of having Gilles referred to with masculine pronouns is because it stops you running into the pronoun problem. When you're writing about same-gender relationships, it can get a bit confusing where you have she, or he, and it's hard to, or you have to do like a lot of naming over and over again, and it can get a little bit confusing and exhausting. And Moss seems to have just gone, well, to the world, he's Gilles, so she got around that quite easily. And I also think it does bring an interesting aspect to their dynamic. And yes, her being 15 years Gilles senior and basically being his employer, it is addressed. It's a point that I think could have been spoken about a little more, as it is quite the difference, especially given the class disparity in their upbringing. But all that to say, I still really enjoyed what was there between them, and I do think that a lot of it is like, you can read into the power dynamic that is between them, and they're just an incredibly sweet couple, and I was behind them every step of the way. And to be fair, the power dynamic that is between them is clearly somewhat of the appeal for Gilles. He loves calling attention to her rank, calling her mistress and commander in a hushed whisper, and we get moments like, "Will you stay with me tonight?" she asked. The hourglass was running down. For one night, the real world could be forgotten. It was time out of time. "Stay here, with me." He met her gaze. "Do you order it, Mistress Captain?" "I do." "Then I am yours to command." And you know what? Good for them. Gilles has mummy issues, like bad mummy issues, and he's resolving that by way of a powerful older woman. Who can blame him? Their dynamic is so charming, and watching the way they open up and warm to each other is so darling. It all just feels very natural. Now, I will cycle back a second and say that yes, I am aware that there is very easily a reading where Gilles is a trans man, and I would not hold it against anyone reading it that way. The thing that stops me personally reading it that way is that he was put into the role of being a boy, being a man, rather than that being something that he realizes that is a role that fits him best. It's sort of why I went more with saying that there's a queerness to the book rather than, well, to their dynamic rather than anything else. Gilles is also easy to read as a bit of both. Sort of there's masculinity, femininity, maleness, femaleness kind of thing, or that you can read him as neither when it comes to gender dynamics. And I love it. Like, to be really clear, I love what he has going on, but to me, I read him more as a sort of woman with a lot of masculine qualities who clearly does somewhat enjoy the bothness of it. But it's a difficult one, because there were times when I felt the affinity to the transness that can be read into with it, but it purely is just the fact that he did not make that decision to present as masculine himself. And were that his decision, then I think I would make more of that reading. But like I said, I love what he has going on, and I love the way that the gender dynamic works in terms of the relationship with Gilles and Louise. And that isn't our only dose of lesbianism. Elise, Louise's aunt, runs the Van Rye merchant fleet with her partner Cornelia, and really it is Cornelia that does most of the running, but to the outside world the two of them are close personal friends, and their partnership goes no further than that of the business. They get away with living a queer life in an incredibly pious place by way of, one, being women, and two, kind of just living in plain sight. People don't question women who are close and affectionate with one another in the way they do with men, and there's a reason that laws have historically been different between the sexes when it comes to homosexuality and how hard people are likely to go on the sexes. I think people see men's sexuality as more harmful, which is a very tricky area, but I'm not diving into that. That's a side tangent that I'm not going down. But not being secretive with Elise and Cornelia, by not being too secretive or completely hiding themselves away, allowing themselves to be affectionate with one another, people don't question what they might be behind closed doors. Women can tell themselves, women can tell each other that they love each other. Women can be physically affectionate in public. They can, if two women walk down the street holding hands, most people aren't going to be like, lesbians. They're just not. Unless it's known, and especially if they're not like visibly more masculine. And to be fair, I did assume that they might well be a partnership in more than just a business sense well before the confirmation of this, but to be fair, I'm a 21st century man. Knowing that I'm reading a novel with lesbians and queerness in it, I have my mind switch on to the idea that, you know, gays exist in a way that 17th century Dutchmen might not. And there are also a few running motifs and themes in the book that really caught my eye. For one, we have tarot. Days before Gilles becomes his brother, he saw a tarot reader out in the streets and was awestruck. The whole affair was just so vivid and captivating to him, and he ends up being given the Justice card, with the reader clearly sensing that there is something about the young Gilles, and I'll get into how this card ties into one of the biggest themes of the book a little later on. But first, we do have another reading when Louise is showing Gilles the streets of Amsterdam. She's found out about that card, and she's found out about that card that he keeps with him throughout the novel, and I do really like that it seems to be that Moss really gets tarot. Not just the meanings of cards, but the fact that it's an interpretive art between both the reader and the person pulling the cards. While there's a sense of this with the first reader Gilles meets, it's still clear that tarot readers are not all-out psychics who can give you exact prophecies. It is not a medium of absolutes, but rather that of interpretation and intuition. And sure, it isn't all that surprising when Gilles pulls the Lovers, but I do like that it's reversed. At this time, the two of them are still keeping secrets from each other, but have already reached a point of knowing that there are feelings there. Moss, in this scene and throughout, weaves in the tarot cards into the story so well, and clearly understands how people who have had tarot readings will look back at the moment where they had that reading and go, oh, that's what this meant. I was been looking for signs of how that's going to come into effect, and here we are. When the Lover's card is revealed on the table, there's this heavy tension, and it's brilliant, only amplified by the explanation of it being reversed. But that But then that explanation also serves as the reminder that, quote unquote, your destiny is in your own hands. There are obstacles in the way of these two lovers forming a unit, but you are the one to be able to overcome said obstacles. We know the major secret at this point is mostly to do with Gilles' true nature, and things are generally much smoother between them when that truth is revealed. The more open and honest they are with each other, the easier the road before them is. Now, back to the idea of justice, often portrayed in tarot as the scales of justice, keeping things in order, balancing the bad with the good, and with injustice comes a sort of karma. Throughout the book, the idea of the scales being balanced, but not necessarily in conventional ways, is, oh my god, the way she uses that is fantastic. Quote unquote bad things happen, but generally for the right reasons. The death of Louise's father at her hand as a child only happened because she witnessed him attacking her mother in both a sexual manner, and he then kills her with a knife. When Gilles' mother dies, it is because Louise is fighting her, trying to get into a drawer to get paperwork that rightly belongs to Gilles, and that would mean that this woman can stop blackmailing her son, or threatening to blackmail her son, or daughter, I suppose, whichever one you want to use. In the fight, she falls, his mother falls, and ends up on her own knife. Louise manages to escape the death penalty, but it isn't because of her being found not guilty and some kind of pardon. It's a matter of blood money and bribery. It's just malleable politicians. When the original captain of the Old Moon is killed, it does not feel like a loss. I think I was even celebrating, as a matter of fact, because he's a grade A rancid bastard. Even the ghost ship itself, they're inherently doing a good thing by removing slavers and corsairs from the sea, but they are still taking lives in doing so. And I just love the way that the idea of keeping justice balanced isn't so black and white, and I just, it's so much fun. And finally, I just want to end by saying Moss's imagery is so incredible. Her scenery is so vibrant and vivid, even in the greyest of places, and the sight of the ship that went through the deadly sea fog is deeply haunting. It wouldn't be out of place in a horror novel, and the book could easily have turned that way after that moment. It was so good. And though I've known of Kate Moss for a while, this is actually the first book of hers that I've picked up, and what an introduction to her work. This was an incredible book to dive into, and I did reserve the sequel from the library as soon as I was finished reading, though I was expecting the pirate stuff to begin a little sooner. I can't say I'm actually disappointed, really. I do hope the sequel has a little more sort of seafaring action, but its absence won't be something that I'll be too upset about. And the thing is, I didn't know going in that Ghost Ship was part of a series. I just didn't see that when I picked the book up, and in the end, I sort of went, right, well, maybe, I googled it just to find out if I've made a mistake here. Google said, no, you can read this one as a standalone novel, and yes, you absolutely can. This is not something you have to worry about. I'm sure if you've read other books in this series, there will be little names, places, references that will make a little more sense, but there was nothing that I found where I was going, I don't get this, I don't know who that is. Everybody referenced made sense within this book. There may be people that you go, oh, that's that person. Like, towards the end, we meet somebody called Philippe, and I know I'm going to have to suffer with him when I read that sequel, because we're going to have a lot of, flashbacks, I presume. It would make sense. And he's going to be irritating as shit. And I do wonder if he's a character who features in some of the other novels, because he seems a little like we might already have met him in hindsight, but I have no idea. Anyway, let me know what pirate fiction you love, regardless of genre. you know, whether it be historical, be it sci-fi, fantasy, any of it. I've been trying to write something piratey for an age now, and one day I'll get onto it, and maybe in reading more pirate stuff, I'll be able to do it. Points if the pirates are gay and or women, because I love women pirate stories, like female-led pirate stories. It's like the name Anne Bonny is mentioned in some of the there's like a little preamble at the beginning, like a little preface about some of the historical notes that are featured within the book, and people like Anne Bonny are mentioned. And I love real stories about the way that women were on the seas, because there is so much of that superstition about a woman on board being bad luck. To keep up with what I'm doing, feel free to like, feel free to subscribe, and feel free to ring that notification bell. All the cringe shit I'm supposed to ask you to do in my videos. But most importantly, I hope you have a wonderful day, a wonderful night, a wonderful whenever you are watching this. Take good care of yourself. Right.